The floorboard creaked beneath her bare feet as she descended the last step. I stood there in the dim hallway light, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Samantha Ramirez looked at me with those dark eyes that had haunted my thoughts for months, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting for you," she said. The words hung in the air between us like something fragile and precious. I wanted to reach out and touch her face, to make sure this moment was real, but my hands stayed frozen at my sides. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. But let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here. Hello, my name is Nicholas Torres. I'm 32 years old. I work as a carpenter in the small town of Cedar Falls, where everyone knows everyone and secrets don't stay buried long. I live in the house my grandfather built with his own hands in 1957, the same house where my father grew up, where I learned to swing a hammer before I could properly tie my shoes. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when I first saw her. The maple trees were just starting to turn, painting the streets in shades of gold and amber that made the whole town look like it was glowing from within. I was replacing the front steps of the old Victorian on Elm Street, the one that had been empty for 3 years until someone finally bought it and decided to bring it back to life. I heard the moving truck before I saw it, the rumble of diesel and the screech of air brakes cutting through the morning quiet. When I looked up from measuring a board at the Mayan, there she was, standing on the sidewalk with her hands on her hips, staring up at the house like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She was beautiful in a way that caught you off guard. Not the kind of beauty you see in magazines or movies, but something more real, more present. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore jeans with paint stains and a flannel shirt that looked like it had seen better days. But it was her eyes that got me. They were the color of coffee, rich and warm, and when she looked at something, really looked at it, you could see her thinking. The moving guys were already unloading boxes, and I tried to focus on my work, but I kept stealing glances. She directed them with quiet authority, pointing to where things should go, thanking them when they struggled with something heavy. There was kindness in the way she moved. Consideration for others that you don't see as much as you'd like to. Around noon, she walked over to where I was working. I was kneeling on the porch, fitting a new board into place, when her shadow fell across my hands. "Excuse me," she said, and I looked up to find her smiling. "I'm Samantha. I just moved in across the street." I stood up, suddenly aware of the sawdust on my clothes and the fact that I probably smelled like wood stain and sweat. "Nicholas," I said, wiping my hand on my jeans before offering it to her. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Her handshake was firm, confident. "Thank you. I was wondering, do you know if there's a good coffee shop around here? The movers have been at it since 6 this morning, and I think they could use some caffeine." "Martha's Place, 2 blocks down on Main Street," I said. "Best coffee in town." "Only coffee in town, really, but it's good." She laughed, and the sound made something warm unfurl in my chest. "Perfect. Would you like me to bring you anything?" Seems like the least I can do for the welcoming committee. I should have said no. I had work to finish, and I didn't really know this woman. But something about the way she asked, genuine and open, made me nod. "Coffee would be great. Black, no sugar." "Black coffee for the carpenter," she said like she was making a mental note. "I'll be right back. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments." She returned 20 minutes later with a cardboard tray holding 4 cups and a white paper bag that smelled like heaven. The moving guys descended on the coffee like grateful wolves. And she handed me mine with a smile that made me forget what I was supposed to be doing. "I got you a blueberry muffin too," she said, pulling it from the bag. "Martha insisted. Said anyone working that hard needed proper sustenance." We sat on the steps I'd just finished, drinking coffee and watching the town go about its business. A few cars passed, their drivers slowing down to get a look at the new neighbor. Mrs. Henderson from the corner house walked by with her ancient beagle, and I introduced them. Samantha was gracious, asking about them all and complimenting Mrs. Henderson's garden. "So, what brings you to Cedar Falls?" I asked when we were alone again. Samantha was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers. "Fresh start," she said finally. "Sometimes you need to go somewhere nobody knows your story so you can write a new one." There was something in her voice, a weight that suggested the story she was leaving behind wasn't entirely happy. I wanted to ask more, But I'd learned over the years that people shared what they wanted to share when they were ready. Well, you picked a good place for it, I said instead. Cedar Falls specializes in fresh starts. Half the people here came from somewhere else, looking for the same thing. What about you? She asked. Are you from here originally? Born and raised, third generation Torres to live in the same house. I pointed down the street to where my grandfather's oak tree towered over the neighborhood. That's home right there under the big tree. That must be nice, she said, and there was something wistful in her voice. Having roots like that, knowing where you belong. It has its perks, I admitted, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to start over somewhere new, to be someone different. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt like she was seeing something most people missed. You can be someone different right where you are, she said. Sometimes the biggest changes happen in the smallest spaces. The moving truck finished up around 3, and Samantha walked over to thank me again for the coffee recommendation. She was heading inside when she paused at her front door and turned back. Nicholas, she called out, would you maybe want to have dinner sometime? I mean, I don't know anyone here yet, and you seem like good company. My heart did something complicated in my chest. I'd like that, I said, but trying to keep my voice steady. How about Friday? There's a place called Giuseppe's that does decent Italian food. Friday sounds perfect. That was how it started. A simple dinner invitation from a woman who just moved to town, looking for connection in a place where she knew no one. But as I watched her disappear into her house, I had the strangest feeling that something significant had just shifted in my carefully ordered world. The rest of the week crawled by. I found myself working on projects that gave me a clear view of her house, hoping to catch glimpses of her coming and going. She was an early riser, I discovered. Every morning at 7:30, she'd emerge with a travel mug of coffee and walk to the end of the block and back, like she was exploring her new territory one street at a time. On Thursday evening, I was in my workshop when I heard a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a wild moment, I hoped it might be Samantha. Instead, I found my neighbor, Jeffrey Garcia, standing on my porch, holding a beer and wearing his usual concerned expression. Hey, Nick, Wayne, he said. Got a minute? Jeffrey had lived next door for 8 years, ever since his divorce. He was a good guy, worked at the bank downtown, but he had a tendency to worry about everything and everyone. I invited him in, and we settled in my kitchen with beers of our own. So, he said, getting straight to the point like he always did, I hear you're taking the new neighbor out tomorrow night. News traveled fast in Cedar Falls. Where'd you hear that? Martha mentioned it when I stopped by for coffee. Said Samantha asked her about Giuseppe's. He took a sip of his beer and studied me. You sure that's a good idea? Why wouldn't it be? Jeffrey shrugged. I don't know anything about her. Nobody does. She just showed up with a moving truck and no backstory. Don't you think that's a little strange? Maybe she values her privacy, I said, feeling defensive. Not everyone needs to broadcast their life story to the whole town. I'm just saying, be careful. You're a good guy, Nick. You see the best in people, and sometimes that makes you blind to red flags. I appreciated Jeffrey's concern, but something about his warning rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was because I'd been thinking the same thing myself, wondering what had brought Samantha to Cedar Falls and why she seemed so guarded about her past. But hearing it from someone else made me want to defend her, even though I barely knew her. I'm a grown man, I said. I think I can handle dinner with a neighbor. Jeffrey raised his hands in surrender. You're right, I'm sorry. It's just, you haven't dated anyone since Kelly, and I worry about you. Kelly Torres had been my wife for 6 years. We'd married young, thinking love was enough to bridge the gap between who we were and who we wanted to become. But love, as it turned out, wasn't always enough. She'd wanted adventure, travel, a life bigger than what Cedar Falls could offer. I'd wanted stability, roots, a family to carry on in the house my grandfather built. The divorce had been amicable, if heartbreaking. Kelly moved to Portland, where she worked for a nonprofit that organized international volunteer trips. We still exchanged Christmas cards, and I was genuinely happy she'd found what she was looking for. But it had been 3 years since then, 3 years of casual dates that never led anywhere, and a growing sense that maybe I was meant to be alone. Kelly was a long time ago, I told Jeffrey, and this is just dinner. Okay, he said, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Just promise me you'll take it slow. Get to know her before you get too invested. After Jeffrey left, I sat in my kitchen thinking about what he'd said. Was I being naive? Was there something about Samantha that should concern me? I thought about the way she'd looked at her new house, like she was seeing possibilities instead of problems. I thought about her kindness to the moving guys, her easy conversation with Mrs. Henderson. I thought about the sadness I'd glimpsed in her eyes when she talked about fresh starts. Everyone had a story, I decided. Everyone had reasons for the choices they made. If Samantha wanted to keep hers private for now, that was her right. I could respect that and still enjoy her company. Friday evening arrived with a crisp autumn chill and the kind of golden light that made everything look like a painting. I showered and put on my best jeans and a button-down shirt that Kelly had bought me years ago. One she'd said brought out the green in my eyes. I felt nervous in a way I hadn't experienced in years, like a teenager getting ready for his first date. Samantha's house looked different when I walked up to the front door. The moving boxes were gone from the porch, and she'd hung a simple wreath on the door made of autumn leaves and small pine cones. It was a small touch, but it made the house look lived in, welcoming. She answered the door wearing a navy blue dress that hit just below her knees and a cardigan the color of cream. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she'd put on just enough makeup to highlight her natural beauty without hiding it. "Hi," she said, and I could hear nervousness in her voice that matched my own. "Hi yourself. You look beautiful." She smiled, and some of the tension in her shoulders relaxed. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Giuseppe's was a 10-minute walk from her house, and we took our time talking about the changing leaves in the houses we passed. She asked about the history of different buildings, and I found myself sharing stories I'd grown up hearing from my grandfather about the families who'd lived in Cedar Falls for generations. "Your grandfather sounds like he was quite a storyteller," she said as we approached the restaurant. He was. He could make a trip to the grocery store sound like an epic adventure. I think that's where I got my appreciation for the details that make up a life. "Details matter," she agreed. "They're what make a place feel like home." Giuseppe's was busy for a Friday night, filled with couples and families enjoying the weekend's beginning. We were seated at a corner table with red checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. The kind of place that had been exactly the same for 30 years and wouldn't change for 30 more. We ordered wine and studied our menus, but I found myself more interested in watching Samantha take in her surroundings. She had a way of observing that was both careful and appreciative, like she was collecting details to remember later. "So," I said after the waiter had taken our orders, "what do you do for work?" I realized I never asked. "I'm a graphic designer," she said. "Freelance, mostly. I can work from anywhere as long as I have a good internet connection." "That must be nice, the freedom to live wherever you want." "It has its advantages," she said, but there was something guarded in her tone. "What about you? Have you always been a carpenter?" "Since I was 18. My dad taught me the trade, and his dad taught him. There's something satisfying about working with your hands, creating something that will last." "I can see that," she said. "There's permanence in what you do." My work exists mostly in the digital world. Sometimes I wonder if any of it really matters. Of course it matters. You help people communicate, express themselves. That's important. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes it's hard to remember." Our food arrived, and we settled into the comfortable rhythm of a good meal shared with good company. She told me about some of her projects, designing logos for small businesses and creating marketing materials for nonprofits. I told her about the houses I'd worked on, the satisfaction of restoring something old to its former glory. "There's this house on Maple Street," I said, gesturing with my fork. "Built in 1895, been in the same family for 4 generations. Last year, they hired me to restore the original hardwood floors. When I pulled up the carpet, underneath was this beautiful oak, just waiting to be brought back to life." "That sounds amazing," Samantha said. "Like archaeology, but for houses." "Exactly. Every old house has stories to tell if you know how to listen." "What stories does your house tell?" I thought about that for a moment. Persistence, I think. My grandfather built it after he came back from the war, determined to create something stable for his family. My parents raised 3 kids there, and even though I was the only one who stayed in town, it's still the place my brother and sister come home to for holidays. That's beautiful, she said softly, to have that kind of continuity. What about you? I asked. What's your family like? Something shifted in her expression. A subtle closing off that I might have missed if I hadn't been paying attention. It's complicated, she said. I'm not really in touch with them anymore. I wanted to ask more, but the way she said it made it clear the subject was closed. Instead, I told her about my siblings, my brother Aaron, who lived in Chicago with his wife and 2 kids, my sister who'd moved to California to pursue her dream of becoming a screenwriter. Do you miss them? She asked. Every day, but I also know they're living the lives they need to live. Sometimes loving someone means letting them go where they need to go. Samantha looked at me with those coffee-colored eyes, and I felt like she understood something about that sentiment that went deeper than my words. We walked home slowly, taking the long way through the downtown area where old-fashioned streetlights cast pools of warm light on the sidewalk. The night was clear and cool, and I could smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace, mixing with the scent of fallen leaves. Thank you for tonight, Samantha said as we approached her house. I haven't had an evening like this in a long time. Neither have I admitted. Would you maybe want to do it again sometime? She turned to face me, and in the glow of her porch light, I could see something vulnerable in her expression. I'd like that, she said. But Nicholas, I should tell you something. I'm not really looking for anything serious right now. I'm still figuring out who I am in this new place. That's okay, I said, and I meant it. We can figure it out as we go. She smiled then, and stepped closer to give me a hug. It was brief, friendly, but I caught a hint of her perfume, something light and floral that made me want to hold on longer. Good night, Nicholas. Good night, Samantha. I walked home with my hands in my pockets, feeling lighter than I had in months. Jeffrey's warnings echoed in the back of my mind, but I pushed them away. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts about people, and my instincts told me that Samantha Ramirez was worth getting to know, whatever her story might be. Over the next few weeks, we fell into an easy friendship. She'd wave from her window when she saw me working in my yard. Sometimes she'd bring me coffee when I was doing projects around the neighborhood. We had dinner twice more, once at the diner on Main Street and once at her house, where she cooked an incredible pasta dish, and we talked until nearly midnight. I learned that she was an early riser who loved to watch the sunrise from her back porch. She was teaching herself to play guitar, practicing in her living room with the windows open so the music drifted across the street. She read voraciously, mostly literary fiction and biographies, and had strong opinions about coffee that she was happy to share with anyone who would listen. But there were still shadows in her story, places where the conversation would hit a wall and she'd change the subject with practiced ease. She never mentioned her family beyond that initial comment about it being complicated. When I asked about her life before Cedar Falls, she'd give vague answers about living in different cities for work, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. It was Robert Nguyen, the mailman, who first mentioned that Samantha's mail came from a forwarding service rather than directly from her previous address. Robert had been delivering mail in Cedar Falls for 15 years, and he noticed patterns that escaped the rest of us. Might not mean anything, he said when he stopped by one morning while I was replacing a section of fence. But usually when someone moves, they have mail forwarding from their old address for a while. Her mail comes through one of those services that businesses use when they want to keep their real address private. I didn't know what to make of that information. Maybe she was just being cautious about her privacy. Maybe she'd had problems with an ex-boyfriend or a difficult landlord. There were plenty of innocent explanations, but it added another layer to the mystery of Samantha Ramirez. October passed in a blur of golden days and crisp nights. Samantha and I developed a routine of sorts. We'd have coffee together most Saturday mornings, either at Martha's place or on one of our porches. She'd tell me about her work projects, and I'd update her on the various renovations I was tackling around town. She was working on a logo design for a small organic farm outside of town, and she showed me her sketches one morning, asking for my opinion on which design best captured the feeling of sustainable agriculture. This one, I said, pointing to a design that incorporated a simple barn silhouette with growing vines. It's clean but warm, makes you think of tradition and innovation at the same time. That's exactly what I was going at from all, she said, looking pleased. You have a good eye for design. I work with my hands all day. You start to develop an appreciation for things that are both functional and beautiful. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're not what I expected when I moved here. What did you expect? I don't know, small town life, small town thinking, people who've never been anywhere or done anything different. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. But you're more thoughtful than that, more curious about the world. Maybe small town life gives you space to think about things differently, I said. Less noise, more time to pay attention to what matters. Maybe, she said, but there was something wistful in her voice, like she was remembering something she'd lost. It was the first week of November when everything changed. I was working on a kitchen renovation for the Hernandez family when Peter Hernandez pulled me aside during my lunch break. "Nick," he said, glancing around to make sure his wife Kimberly wasn't listening, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm only bringing this up because I care about you." My stomach tightened. In a small town, conversations that started like that rarely ended well. "What's going on, Peter?" "It's about your neighbor, Samantha. Kimberly has a cousin who works for a private investigation firm in the city. She was here last weekend, and she saw Samantha at the grocery store. She thinks she recognized her from a case her firm worked on a few years ago." I set down my sandwich, my appetite suddenly gone. "What kind of case?" She couldn't say much, client confidentiality and all that, but she thought Samantha might have been involved in some kind of fraud investigation. Identity theft, maybe, or embezzlement. She wasn't sure, but she was pretty certain it was the same woman. The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about Samantha's reluctance to talk about her past, the way her mail came through a forwarding service, the careful way she answered questions about her previous life. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Kimberly's cousin is pretty good at remembering faces. She said she'd try to look into it discreetly, see if she could find out more." I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on work. But my mind kept wandering to Samantha. Was it possible that the woman I'd been falling for was running from something criminal? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't shake Peter's words. That evening, I sat on my porch watching Samantha's house, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the possibility that she might be hiding something serious. She was in her living room practicing guitar, and the soft melody drifted across the street like it had dozens of times before, but now it sounded different, sadder somehow. She must have seen me sitting there because she came outside, guitar in hand. "Hey," she called out, "want to hear what I've been working on?" I walked across the street, feeling like I was betraying her just by entertaining Peter's suspicions. She played a simple melody, something melancholy and beautiful that seemed to capture the feeling of autumn evenings and changing seasons. "That's lovely," I said when she finished. "Did you write it?" "I've been trying to. Music was always something I wanted to learn, but I never had the time before." She looked up at me, and in the porch light, I could see something vulnerable in her expression. "Nicholas, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you made choices that seemed right at the time, but now you're not sure who you really are?" The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I think everyone does. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the difference between who we are and who we think we're supposed to be. She set the guitar aside and hugged her knees to her chest. Moving here has given me space to think about things I'd been avoiding for a long time. I wanted to ask her what she meant, what she'd been avoiding, but looking at her sitting there, small and thoughtful in the circle of porch light, I couldn't bring myself to voice Peter's suspicions. "Sometimes change is good," I said instead, "even when it's scary." "Yeah," she said softly, "sometimes it is." The next few days passed in a strange tension. I found myself watching Samantha differently, looking for signs that she might be hiding something significant. But everything about her seemed genuine. The way she thanked Martha for her coffee, the careful attention she paid to Mrs. Henderson's stories about her late husband, the hours she spent working in her small garden, preparing it for winter. On Thursday evening, Kimberly Brown called me. Peter's wife had never called me before, and I knew immediately that she had news about Samantha. "Nick," she said without preamble, "my cousin looked into that situation we discussed. I think you need to know what she found." My heart was pounding as I waited for her to continue. Samantha Ramirez was involved in a fraud case 3 years ago, but not the way we thought. She was the victim, not the perpetrator. Her ex-husband used her identity to embezzle money from the nonprofit where she worked. When everything came out, she lost her job, her reputation, everything. The investigation cleared her of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. I felt like I'd been holding my breath 4 days and could finally exhale. So she's not running from the law? No, but she might be running from the fallout. My cousin said the case got a lot of media attention because the nonprofit worked with children. Even though Samantha was cleared, her name was associated with the scandal. She probably came here to start over somewhere nobody would recognize her. After Kimberly hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my hands. Everything made sense now. Samantha's reluctance to talk about her past, her comment about needing a fresh start, the sadness I sometimes glimpsed in her eyes. She'd been betrayed by someone she trusted, lost everything she'd worked for, and came to Cedar Falls to rebuild her life. I thought about all the times over the past month when I'd sensed she wanted to tell me something but held back. The weight she carried, the careful way she answered questions about her previous life. She'd been protecting herself, probably wondering if she could trust me with the truth. The question now was what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to go to her immediately, to tell her I knew and that it didn't matter. But another part of me knew that would be a violation of her privacy. She deserved the right to tell me her story when she was ready. I decided to wait, to let her know through my actions that she could trust me, that whatever her past held, it wouldn't change how I felt about her. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Saturday morning, I was working in my yard when I saw Samantha sitting on her front steps, still in her pajamas, holding a cup of coffee and staring at her phone with an expression of absolute devastation. I walked over without thinking, the way you do when someone you care about is clearly in pain. Samantha, are you okay? She looked up at me and I could see she'd been crying. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I must look like a mess. You look like someone who's had bad news. What's wrong? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with whether to tell me. Finally, she held up her phone. There's an article, she said quietly, about the nonprofit I used to work for. They're doing a follow-up story about the embezzlement case, and my name is mentioned. Someone I used to work with shared it on social media, and now people are commenting, bringing up all the old accusations. I sat down beside her on the steps. I'm sorry, that must be incredibly difficult. The worst part is that it's following me here. I thought I could start over, be just Samantha from Cedar Falls who designs logos and is learning to play guitar. But the internet doesn't forget, does it? No, I said, it doesn't. But the people who matter, the ones who know you now, they see who you really are. She looked at me with those coffee-colored eyes, and I could see her weighing whether to trust me with more of the story. Nicholas, she said finally, there are things about my past that I haven't told you. Things that might change how you feel about being my friend. Try me. She took a deep breath, and I could see her gathering courage. 3 years ago, I was married to a man named Marcus. I thought I knew him, thought we had a good life together. I was working for a children's charity, doing their marketing and communications. It was the kind of job that felt meaningful, you know? Like I was making a difference. I nodded, not wanting to interrupt. Marcus worked in finance, and he was always good with money. So when he offered to help the nonprofit with some of their accounting, I thought it was generous. I recommended him to my boss, vouched for him. Her voice broke a little. He used that trust to steal almost $200,000 over 8 months. Samantha, I'm so sorry. When it all came out, everyone assumed I had to have known. How could his wife not know what he was doing? The investigation cleared me legally, but professionally and personally, I was destroyed. I lost my job, my friends, my marriage. The media coverage was brutal. She was crying now, and I wanted to put my arm around her, but I wasn't sure if she'd welcome the comfort. I changed my name back to my maiden name and tried to start over in different cities, but the story always seemed to follow me. Potential employers would Google my name and find the articles. People would recognize me and start whispering. I finally realized I needed to go somewhere completely new, somewhere I could just be myself without the weight of all that history. Is that why you came to Cedar Falls? She nodded. I researched small towns where I could work remotely, places where people might not spend their time reading about financial scandals in the city. I thought maybe here I could build a life based on who I am now, not who I was married to 3 years ago. I was quiet for a moment, processing everything she told me. The courage it must have taken to start over so completely. To trust that she could build something new from the ruins of her old life. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. You're not horrified? You don't think I'm naive or stupid for not seeing what Marcus was doing? I think you're brave, I said. I think you survived something that it would have broken a lot of people and you found the strength to start over. That's not naive, that's remarkable. She looked at me like she couldn't quite believe what I was saying. You don't think less of me? Samantha, the woman who brings coffee to moving guys and learns the names of all the dogs in the neighborhood and practices guitar with her windows open so everyone can enjoy the music? That's who you are. Whatever happened before, whatever someone else did using your name, that doesn't change who you are. She started crying harder then, but it was different tears, the kind that come with relief rather than despair. Without thinking, I put my arm around her, and she leaned into me, letting herself be comforted for the first time in who knows how long. I've been so afraid, she whispered. Afraid that if people knew the truth, they'd see me differently, that they'd always wonder if I was lying about something. The truth is that you were betrayed by someone you trusted, and you survived it. That's nothing to be ashamed of. We sat there on her front steps as the morning sun climbed higher, and I felt something shift between us. Not just attraction or friendship, but a deeper understanding. She'd trusted me with her most vulnerable truth, and I'd been able to hold it without judgment. What happens now? She asked eventually. Now you decide if you want to let one article ruin the life you've been building here, or if you want to keep moving forward. What if people in town find out? What if they start looking at me differently? Then we deal with it together, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. You don't have to face this alone anymore. That afternoon, I called Jeffrey and asked him to come over. If Samantha was going to stay in Cedar Falls, if we were going to build something together, then the people who mattered needed to know the truth from me rather than discovering it from gossip or internet searches. Jeffrey arrived within an hour, bringing Aaron King with him. Aaron owned the hardware store downtown and had a way of knowing everything that happened in Cedar Falls before it happened. If I could convince these two that Samantha deserved their support, word would spread through the right channels. I told them everything Samantha had shared with me, emphasizing that she'd been the victim of her ex-husband's crimes, not an accomplice. I watched their faces as I spoke, seeing their expressions shift from suspicion to understanding to something like protective anger on her behalf. So she's been carrying this around for 3 years? Aaron asked. Starting over in different places every time someone figured out who she was? That's what it sounds like. Jeffrey was quiet for a long moment. You know what this means, don't you? If that article is circulating online, it's only a matter of time before someone in town connects the dots. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. I want people to hear the real story, not some twisted version that makes her sound guilty. What do you need from us? Aaron asked. Just be her friend. If people start talking, set the record straight. She's been through enough. They both nodded, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the kind of community Cedar Falls could be when it mattered. Small towns had their drawbacks, but they also had the capacity to circle the wagons around someone who needed protection. That evening, I knocked on Samantha's door with a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout from Giuseppe's. I thought you might not feel like cooking, I said when she answered. She changed into jeans and a sweater, and she looked more like herself than she had that morning. That's very thoughtful. Come in. Her living room was cozy in a way that suggested she'd finally started to think of the house as home rather than just a temporary stop. Books were stacked on the coffee table, her guitar leaned against the couch, and she'd hung some of her own artwork on the walls, simple but beautiful designs that brought warmth to the space. We ate at her small dining table, and she told me more about her work, her hopes for building a client base that would let her stay in Cedar Falls long term. She seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing her story had lifted a weight she'd been carrying alone for too long. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she admitted as we finished dinner, for someone to recognize me or for that article to make its way to Cedar Falls. It might happen, I said honestly, but if it does, you won't face it alone. Why are you being so kind to me? Most people would run the other way from this kind of drama. I thought about that question, about all the reasons I cared about her that had nothing to do with her past or her problems. Because you're worth it. because the way you've handled this situation shows more strength and character than most people demonstrate in their entire lives. And because I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between us, and I immediately wondered if I'd said too much too soon. But Samantha's expression softened, and she reached across the table to take my hand. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said quietly. "But I'm scared. I don't have a good track record with trusting people." "We'll take it slow," I said. "We'll figure it out together." She squeezed my hand, and I could see something like hope flickering in her eyes. "Together sounds good." The next few weeks passed peacefully. Samantha threw herself into her work, landing 2 new clients through referrals from the Organic Farm Project. She joined the book club that met monthly at the library, and Martha Edwards, who ran the group, took an immediate liking to her thoughtful insights about the novels they read. I found myself spending more and more time at her house, helping with small repairs and improvements. She wanted to paint the kitchen a warm yellow that would catch the morning light, and we spent a Saturday afternoon choosing colors and textures, debating the merits of different shades like it was the most important decision in the world. "You know," she said as we stood in the paint aisle at Aaron's hardware store, "6 months ago I never would have imagined caring this much about paint colors." "Why not?" "Because I never expected to stay anywhere long enough for it to matter. I was always ready to pack up and move on to the next place." And now, she looked at me with those coffee-colored eyes that had become so familiar, so dear. "Now I want to put down roots. I want to care about paint colors and garden plans and whether the book club likes my suggestions for next month's reading." That evening, as we sat on her back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, she told me about her plans for the spring garden. She wanted to plant herbs and vegetables, maybe some flowers along the fence line. "I've never had a garden before," she said. "Marcus always said it was too much work for renters. But now I want to plant things and watch them grow." "I can help you plant it," I offered. "My grandfather was quite the gardener. He taught me a few things about what grows well in this soil." "I'd like that." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Nicholas, I need to tell you something." My heart skipped, wondering if there was more to her story that she hadn't shared. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not facing things as alone anymore. I think I want to stop running from my past. Not because I'm not afraid anymore, but because I don't want fear to keep making my decisions for me." "What does that mean?" "It means I want to stay in Cedar Falls, really stay. I want to build a life here with you, if you'll have me. Whatever comes up about my past, whatever people say or think, I want to face it from a place of strength instead of shame." I pulled her closer, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't even realized was unsettled. "I'll have you," I said, "for as long as you want to stay. What if it gets complicated? What if people find out and it affects your business or your reputation? Then we'll deal with it. But Samantha, you need to understand something. This town has seen its share of second chances and fresh starts. Most people here came from somewhere else, looking for the same thing you found. They're not going to judge you for being the victim of someone else's crimes." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I could feel some of the tension leaving her body. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too." December arrived with the first real snow of the season, transforming Cedar Falls into something from a Christmas card. Samantha had never experienced a small-town winter, and she approached it with the same careful attention she brought to everything else, buying proper boots and a warm coat, learning to drive on snowy roads. We spent Christmas Eve at my house, cooking dinner together and exchanging small gifts. She gave me a framed photograph she'd taken of my grandfather's oak tree covered in snow, and I gave her a set of gardening tools for the spring garden we'd been planning. "This feels like the first real Christmas I've had in years," she said as we sat by the fire, drinking wine and watching the snow fall outside my living room window. "What were your Christmases like before?" "Lonely, mostly. After the divorce, I didn't really have anywhere to go now. My parents and I haven't spoken since everything happened. They believed Marcus's version of events, thought I must have known what he was doing." She was quiet for a moment. "I spent the last 3 Christmases alone in whatever apartment I was renting, trying not to think about what I'd lost." I took her hand, thinking about how different this Christmas was for me too. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't since Kelly left, filled with laughter and conversation and the possibility of a shared future. Well, you're not alone anymore, I said. No, she agreed, smiling. I'm not. It was the week after New Year's when the inevitable finally happened. I was at Giuseppe's picking up lunch when I overheard two women at the next table talking in the loud whispers that meant they wanted to be heard. I'm telling you, it's her, one of them was saying. My daughter showed me the article online. Samantha Ramirez, the woman who was married to that man who stole all that money from the children's charity. Are you sure? She seems so nice. Well, of course she seems nice. She's trying to hide what she did. I turned around to face them and they had the grace to look embarrassed at being overheard. Excuse me, I said politely, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Samantha was the victim in that case, not the perpetrator. Her ex-husband used her identity to commit fraud. She was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. The first woman, who I recognized as Kimberly Clark from the post office, looked skeptical. That's what they all say, isn't it? Nobody ever admits to being guilty. In this case, it's what the FBI investigation concluded after 8 months of looking into every aspect of her life. She lost everything because of what her husband did, including her mom and her reputation. She came here to start over, which I think shows remarkable courage. I left them sitting there, hopefully reconsidering their assumptions, but I knew the damage was already being done. In a town the size of Cedar Falls, gossip moved faster than news, and by evening I was getting calls from concerned friends wanting to know if what they'd heard was true. I found Samantha in her kitchen that night, sitting at the table with her laptop open, staring at the screen with an expression of resignation. It's starting, isn't it? She said when I walked in. Some people are talking, but not everyone, and not the people who matter. She turned the laptop toward me, and I saw she'd been reading comments on a local Facebook group where someone had shared the article about her ex-husband's crimes. Look at what they're saying, she said quietly. Half of them think I must have been involved. The other half are debating whether I should be allowed to stay in town. I read through the comments, feeling anger build in my chest at the casual cruelty of people who didn't know her passing judgment based on incomplete information and wild speculation. These people don't know you, I said. Their opinions don't matter. But they do matter, don't they? These are my neighbors, potential clients, people I see at the grocery store. If they think I'm some kind of criminal, how can I build a life here? Before I could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Samantha looked at me with panic in her eyes. What if it's someone angry? What if they want me to leave? Only one way to find out, I said, standing up, but whatever it is, we'll face it together. I opened the door to find Martha Edwards standing on the porch, holding a covered dish and wearing her most determined expression. Martha, I said, surprised, come in. She bustled past me into the living room, where Samantha was standing uncertainly by the kitchen doorway. Samantha, dear, Martha said briskly, I brought you some of my famous chicken casserole. I figured you might not feel like cooking tonight, what with all the nonsense people are spreading around town. Samantha looked stunned. You know about the article? Of course I know. My granddaughter showed it to me this afternoon. She also showed me the follow-up article from 2 years ago that explains how the investigation cleared you completely and how your ex-husband is serving time in federal prison. Martha set the casserole dish on the coffee table and turned to face Samantha directly. I also know that you're one of the kindest, most thoughtful people to move to this town in years, and anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. Tears started running down Samantha's face. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Martha said. I'm not the only one who feels this way. Aaron King has been setting people straight at the hardware store all afternoon. Jeffrey Garcia posted that follow-up article on the Facebook group with a very stern lecture about jumping to conclusions. And Peter Hernandez told me to tell you that if anyone gives you trouble, he'll personally escort them out of town. I felt a surge of pride in my community, in the people who chose to lead with compassion rather than suspicion. There will always be some people who prefer drama to truth, Martha continued, but they're not the majority, and they're not the ones who matter. You've found your place here, dear. Don't let a few small minds drive you away from it. After Martha left, Samantha and I sat on her couch, sharing the casserole and talking about what the next few weeks might bring. She was still scared, still worried about the impact on her business and her place in the community, but something had shifted. She was no longer facing the situation alone. You know what I realized tonight, she said as we cleaned up the dishes? What's that? For the first time in 3 years, when people started talking about my past, my first thought wasn't about where I could run to next. It was about how to stay and fight for the life I want here. And how do we do that? By being ourselves, by continuing to build relationships with people who matter, by not hiding from the truth but not letting it define us either. She took my hands in hers, by trusting that love is stronger than fear. I pulled her close, feeling the solid warmth of her against me, the reality of this woman who'd been through hell and come out the other side with her capacity for hope intact. I love your courage, I said. I love the way you've refused to let what happened to you make you bitter or closed off. I love your steadiness, she replied, the way you see the best in people and help them see it in themselves. We stood there in her kitchen, holding each other as the snow continued to fall outside, and I thought about how sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary evenings. This was one of those moments when two people decide to stop running from their fears and start building something together instead. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of renewal that felt almost symbolic. Samantha's garden project became a neighborhood event, with Mrs. Henderson contributing seedlings from her greenhouse and Aaron King donating supplies at a cost. Even some of the people who'd been skeptical about her past found themselves drawn into discussions about soil preparation and planting schedules. Her business was thriving too. Word had spread about her design work, and she'd picked up clients from neighboring towns who appreciated her clean, thoughtful aesthetic. The controversy from the winter had died down, replaced by the more immediate concerns of everyday life in a small town. It was on a warm evening in May, as we worked side by side planting tomatoes and herbs in the garden we'd planned together, that Samantha brought up something that had been on both our minds. "Nicholas," she said, sitting back on her heels and brushing dirt from her hands, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About the future, about what we're building here together." She looked around at the garden, at the house that had become truly hers, at me kneeling beside her in the rich soil. "I want to make it official." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean by official?" She smiled, that warm smile that had captured my attention from the very first day. "I mean, I want to marry you. I want to be your wife and have you be my husband and build a life together that's bigger than either of us could create alone." I sat back, stunned by the directness of her proposal. In all my imagining of how this conversation might go, I'd never pictured her being the one to bring it up. "Are you sure?" I asked. "After everything you went through with Marcus, are you sure you want to try marriage again?" "I'm sure because this is different. We're different. We've seen each other at our most vulnerable, and we've chosen to stay. We've built trust slowly, carefully, with full knowledge of each other's flaws and fears." She reached for my hands, her fingers warm and slightly rough from the garden work. "I'm not afraid of marriage with you, Nicholas. I'm afraid of not having it." I looked at this remarkable woman who'd survived betrayal and public humiliation, who'd had the courage to start over in a place where nobody knew her story, who'd opened her heart to love again despite every reason to keep it closed. "Yes," I said, pulling her close. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you in this town, in this house, with this garden." She laughed, a sound of pure joy that made everything else in the world fade away. "Really?" "Really, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to do this right. I want to ask your father for permission, meet your family, have them be part of our celebration." Her expression grew serious. "Nicholas, I told you, my family and I don't speak anymore. They chose to believe Marcus over me. That was 3 years ago when everything was chaos and nobody knew what to believe. Now there's been time for perspective, for the truth to become clear. Maybe it's time to give them a chance to make things right." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. "What if they still don't believe me? What if they refuse to be part of our wedding? Then we'll have the wedding without them, surrounded by the family we've chosen here in Cedar Falls. But what if they do believe you? What if they've been waiting for a chance to apologize, to welcome you back?" That night, Samantha called her parents for the first time in 3 years. I sat beside her on the couch, holding her free hand as she dialed the number she still knew by heart. "Mom," she said when someone answered, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "It's Samantha. I know it's been a long time, but I wanted to talk to you." The conversation lasted 2 hours. There were tears, apologies, explanations, and finally cautious expressions of love and hope for reconciliation. Her parents had indeed come to understand the truth about Marcus's crimes and their daughter's innocences, but they'd been too proud and too ashamed of their initial reaction to reach out. "They want to meet you," Samantha told me after she hung up. "They want to come for the wedding, if we'll have them." "Of course we'll have them. They're your family." She curled up against me, exhausted but lighter than I'd seen her since that first morning when she'd received the devastating news about the article. "I can't believe this is my life now," she said quietly. 6 months ago, I was alone, convinced I'd never be able to trust anyone again. Now I'm engaged to a man I love, planning a wedding, reconciling with my family. It feels too good to be true. "It's not too good to be true," I said, stroking her hair. "It's just what happens when you stop running and start building." We set the wedding date for October, when the leaves would be changing and the air would have that crisp clarity that made everything in Cedar Falls look like a painting. Samantha wanted a small ceremony, just family and close friends, in the backyard of our house. Our house. We'd started saying that without really discussing it, but it felt natural. She would move in with me after the wedding, and we'd rent out her place to help supplement her income as her business continued to grow. The summer passed in a blur of wedding planning and garden tending and the simple joy of building a life together. Samantha's parents visited in July, and while there was some awkwardness at first, it was clear they genuinely regretted their initial reaction to her situation and were grateful for the chance to make amends. Her father, Robert Nguyen, was a quiet man who worked as an engineer, and he spent hours with me discussing the renovations I'd done to the house, asking thoughtful questions about craftsmanship and technique. Her mother, Kelly Torres, was more emotional, frequently tearing up as she watched her daughter laugh and plan for the future. "I'm so sorry we weren't there for you when you needed us most," she told Samantha one evening as we sat on the back porch after dinner. "You're here now," Samantha replied. "That's what matters." August brought a heat wave that had everyone in town moving slowly and seeking shade, but it also brought news that made us all celebrate. The organic farm that Samantha had designed a logo for had won a statewide award for sustainable agriculture, and they credited her marketing materials with helping them gain recognition. "This could be big for your business," I told her as we read the article in the local paper. "It already is," she said, showing me her phone. "I've gotten 3 new client inquiries just this morning." September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the trees. Our wedding was only a month away, and the entertainment was building not just for us, but for the whole town. Martha Edwards had appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, and she was taking the responsibility very seriously. "Now, dear," she told Samantha one afternoon as they discussed flower arrangements, "you need to understand that this wedding isn't just about you and Nicholas. It's about all of us celebrating the fact that love wins, that second chances are possible, that people can overcome their past and build something beautiful." It was true, I realized. Our wedding had become a symbol for the community, proof that Cedar Falls was the kind of place where people could start over and find happiness. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I walked downstairs and sat on my front porch, looking across the street at Samantha's house, thinking about how much had changed since that September morning when I first saw her standing on the sidewalk with her hands on her hips. I thought about all the moments that had brought us to this point. The first dinner at Giuseppe's, the morning she'd trusted me with her story, the evening she'd proposed in the garden we'd planted together. I thought about the courage it had taken for her to stop running and start building, the faith it had taken for both of us to believe that love could overcome fear. Tomorrow she would become my wife. Tomorrow we would promise to face whatever came next together, to build a life based on trust and understanding and the kind of deep connection that only comes when 2 people see each other clearly and choose to stay. I was still sitting there when I saw a light come on in her bedroom window. A few minutes later, she appeared on her front porch in her pajamas and bare feet. "Couldn't sleep either?" she called softly across the street. "Too excited," I admitted. She walked across the street and sat beside me on the steps, the same steps where we'd shared coffee that first morning. where she'd cried when the article about her past had surfaced, where we'd planned our future together. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "A little. Are you?" "A little, but mostly I'm just grateful." She took my hand, intertwining our fingers. "Grateful that I found the courage to stop running. Grateful that you saw who I really was underneath all the fear and shame. Grateful that we found each other." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the quiet sounds of the town settling into sleep around us. In a few hours, this street would be filled with flowers and music and the people who'd become our chosen family. In a few hours, we would promise to love each other through whatever came next. But for now, it was just us, sitting on the steps of the house my grandfather built, planning a future neither of us could have imagined a year ago. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too." And then she stood up, kissed me gently, and walked back across the street to her house. Tomorrow she wouldn't have to walk back. Tomorrow we would go to sleep in the same bed, in the same house, as husband and wife. I watched her bedroom light go out and finally felt peaceful enough to go inside and try to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be the beginning of everything we'd been building toward, everything we'd been brave enough to hope for. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp October air that made everything seem possible. I woke early and spent the morning making final preparations in the backyard, hanging lights and arranging chairs with the help of Jeffrey and Aaron and Peter. Samantha was getting ready at Martha's house, a tradition that had somehow evolved naturally. All the women in town had wanted to be part of her preparation, and Martha's house had become the staging area for hair and makeup and the careful donning of the simple white dress Samantha had chosen. At 4 o'clock, as the afternoon light was beginning to take on that golden quality that made Cedar Falls look like a fairy tale, our guests began to arrive, Samantha's parents looking proud and emotional. My brother Aaron and his family, who'd driven down from Chicago. My sister, who'd flown in from California. Neighbors and friends, and the people who become our chosen family over the past year. And then, at exactly 4:30, Martha's car pulled up in front of the house, and Samantha stepped out. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was radiant. The dress was simple, elegant, perfect for an outdoor ceremony in a small town. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of flowers from our garden, mixed with wild roses that Mrs. Henderson had contributed. But it was her expression that took my breath away. She looked happy, truly happy, in a way I'd never seen before. Not just content or peaceful, but joyful. Excited about the future we were about to promise each other. She walked up the front steps of our house, the same steps where we'd shared so many conversations, so many moments of growing closer. When she reached me, she took my hands and smiled. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," I said. The ceremony was simple, personal, exactly what we'd wanted. We'd written our own vows, and when it came time to speak them, I looked into her coffee-colored eyes and said the words I'd been carrying in my heart for months. "Samantha, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone perfect for you. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to build something beautiful despite the fear. You made me believe in second chances, in fresh starts, in the possibility that two people can create something together that's stronger than anything they could build alone." When it was her turn, she spoke in a voice that was clear and strong, carrying across the small gathering of people who'd come to celebrate with us. "Nicholas, you saw me when I couldn't see myself. You believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. It's the feeling of being known completely and loved anyway. It's the certainty that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, when I kissed her as our friends and family cheered, I felt like everything in my life had finally clicked into place. This woman, this moment, this town, this life we were building together. It was all exactly as it was meant to be. The reception lasted until well after dark, filled with dancing and laughter and toasts that made us both cry happy tears. But the moment I'll remember most clearly was later, after everyone had gone home and we'd cleaned up the last of the decorations. We were standing in our kitchen, still in our wedding clothes, sharing a piece of leftover cake and talking about the day, when Samantha suddenly stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with wonder in her eyes. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it. We built something beautiful. We did, I agreed, pulling her close. And this is just the beginning. She laughed, that sound of pure joy that had become the soundtrack to our love story. I can't wait to see what comes next. Neither could I. But whatever it was, whatever challenges or adventures or quiet moments of happiness lay ahead, I knew we would face them together. We had learned to trust each other with our deepest fears and biggest dreams. We had chosen love over fear, hope over cynicism, building over running. And as we stood there in the kitchen of the house my grandfather built, holding each other and planning our future, I knew that sometimes the best stories are the ones that start with someone brave enough to stop running and start building, brave enough to meet someone at the bottom of the stairs and whisper, "I've been waiting for you."